Hey guys, Justin with JHart Modelworks. So in the part 2 video for the Alpha Models Ferrari Monza SP2 that we're doing with Mike from Mike's Miniature Motors as a buddy build, we are looking at carbon fiber. There's so much carbon fiber. I think we're just going to focus on the rear end, that big rear diffuser, because that one's really complicated. We're going to take care of the rest of the body decals. We've got some panel liner to do, and then hopefully that should get us into clear coat, and we should be wrapping this thing up in clear by the end of the video. So we got a bit to do. Hopefully it's not going to be as long as the last video. We'll see what happens, but let's get the camera flipped around and get to work. This is what I'm talking about when I call these suggestions and not instructions. So just for this rear diffuser, they're calling for 6 carbon fiber decals, starting with number 69 here in the center. It also calls for D68, D22, D21, D70, and D58. The number 69 in the center makes sense. But 68 and 70, the suggestions show these pointing at these large flat spaces, but if you look at them, these shapes don't match those spaces. From what I can tell, 68 and 70 go on the outside of these large veins on the center of the diffuser. Now it shows 21 and 22 as being right on the very front edge of those diffuser veins, but once again, if you look at the shapes, that's not what those shapes are. From what I can tell, these go on the inside sides of those diffuser veins. Now they point 58 as going along this front surface here, but if you look at 58, I suspect that 58 is supposed to run across the top somehow. Now, it doesn't call out 101, 102, 103, or 104 at all. Now I think 103 and 104 go up here on the top where these reflectors go in and should come down here along the side. And I think 101 and 102 cover these large flat spaces here below it and come along this bottom edge and back up this side over here. Now these 4 thin rectangle parts are in the same area and they are carbon fiber. I thought they went along these thin fronts of the veins here. They do not. Those go on those wheel arches I talked about in the first video in that wheel arch trim. Okay guys, it is currently Tuesday at the moment that I'm recording this little bitty segment here. Mike has just released an update on his build. It's looking gorgeous. Go check it out. Link will be down in the description below. However, in his video, he showed his decals and was talking about this diffuser as well. And I think I now know why my decals don't match the instructions, and I think I figured out what's going on. So Alpha releases these kits in very small batches. This first batch completely sold out, and Mike's kit came out of the first batch. My kit came from the second batch where they re-released the kit. My decals for the diffuser look nothing like the decal that he has for his diffuser. So in his video, he shows 68 and 70, and his are huge and would in fact cover this whole outer third of the diffuser instead of my 68 and 70 that just cover the outer edge of the diffuser vein. And then I've got 2 more on each side that actually cover this section. I believe Alpha made changes to the decal sheet around this rear diffuser to make it easier to do, because Mike in his video talks about he wishes that he had cut his to make it easier. He had a lot of trouble with it. So if you have a kit from the first batch, go check out Mike's video. He's going to talk about this diffuser in his video. If your kit came out of the second batch or later, the instructions that are about to follow will be very helpful for you. Now I am absolutely not doing a how to do carbon fiber tutorial here. There are a dozen much better videos from guys who are much better at this than I am. I am terrible at this. I do want to do this diffuser though because it is complicated and the instructions don't cover everything. But we're going to start out with microset and microsol. If things get really hairy, we can bust out the UMP extra strong decal solution. but I think the Microset and Microsol should have us covered. And there will be lots of love from our trusty heat gun. Now, I did put a coat of Mr. Hobby GX2 UNO black. Now, Frank calls this a utility black, and I think that's absolutely spot on. But this is not a super high gloss piano reflective black, but for things like small chrome parts, things like that, this is a really fairly nice gloss finish. It's also going to help us with getting these decals down. Now, I know there's going to be that guy out there that's going to be like, you do not have to gloss coat to do decals. I get it. I am that guy. You absolutely don't have to gloss coat to do decals. But when you do, it helps because it makes that surface more slick and it gives you more time to move your decals and get them into place. It'll also help reduce the chance of silvering on some decals. Some guys say you absolutely have to gloss coat for adhesion, and personally I don't really agree. I haven't found that it really helps as much as people think it does. The little tiny microscopic spaces between the decal and the ridges and valleys are microscopic. We're doing the gloss coat because we really need more time to get the decals where they need to go. These decals have very complicated shapes. They're going over very complex surfaces, and some of them need very precise placement. Now we are starting with the large number 68 decal in the center because that one makes the most sense and I understand the best where it needs to go. Keep in mind this footage is going to be sped up quite a bit. I have over an hour of raw footage just doing this rear diffuser. We're going to start by dropping our decal into some warm water. Always use warm water. I've got a little coffee warmer over here, less than 15 bucks on Amazon. Really helps for when you're doing really long decal sessions like this. It keeps your water warm for a very long time. We're just going to apply some Microset onto the surface. We'll then pull our decal out and we will start working that into place. And the first thing I noticed is these are really, really thick. These are at least 2 or 3 times as thick as the Scale Motorsport that I'm used to using. They're thicker than the hobby design that I've used in the past too, and these are the same guys who do the hobby design stuff, but these decals are really thick. Now I'm going to keep applying solution to this repeatedly while I just work it into place with the brush. You want to keep the decal wet for as long as you can to give you that time to move it around. And we really need it to start conforming into all of these complex little pockets and crevices. We also want to work the air bubbles out from under it as best as we can. Yeah, I'm not going to have nearly enough Microsol for this, but we're going to go ahead and brush some on, and then we're going to start applying some heat once we get this worked in real good. Now the combination of the much more aggressive Microsol plus the heat from the heat gun will very quickly soften your decal up. This is a really good thing for thick, hard to conform decals because you need it to conform. At the same time, it can also kind of bite you in the butt because it does tend to dry the decal, and once that decal dries, it sets in place and it's very hard to get it to move once it's started to dry up. So we hit it with some heat, we start brushing it in with our brush again, and just trying, like I said, we're just trying to work all the air bubbles out that we can and get it pushed down. But there's going to be a ton of wrinkles in this because, like I said, I'm terrible at this. Once we've got the decal where we want it, we're going to move on to the cotton bud and we're going to start rubbing this decal to try and get any moisture that's trapped underneath it to push off towards the sides so we can get it out from under there. All the tutorials will tell you need to roll the cotton bud over the decal, and I'm sure that would probably help, but I can't ever get my cotton buds to roll right. And I know that, rubbing it like this is a very good chance you could rub it out of position. I do it all the time. Again, all we're trying to do is get all the moisture out from under here and get that decal to conform to the surface. I'm having some trouble getting some of the moisture out and getting that decal into place, so I decided to hit it with some more solution and just keep brushing that in and keep rubbing it with the cotton bud. Eventually I will give up and I will poke a small hole in a couple of places in here, and that will give me another opening that I can push the moisture to and get it out from under the decal. Now what I'm fighting with here is there's a raised plinth for the license plate, And around it, I've got some air, a few air bubbles trapped around that license plate on that edge where it sinks down in, and I can't get those air bubbles to actually make their way all the way to a surface. I'm going to try hitting it with more softening solution, and I'm going to try hitting it with more heat. The nice thing about this being a resin model instead of a plastic one is resin can take a lot more heat than plastic can. You can still mess a piece up with some heat, but it can take a lot more without actually melting the part. And this is the point where I give up. I get something nice and sharp, and I start poking holes in these little bubbles here to release that air and moisture that's trapped in there. And now we can start working those out, and with all the softening solution we've got on there, it really does conform pretty well once we can get those bubbles out. We are 10 minutes into this video. We only have one decal down. We've done a lot of double speed. I've cut out at least 10 minutes worth of footage of me just applying more solution and heating and brushing and heating and brushing. This is why we're only doing this one part in this video. Once we have the center down, we're going to move our way out with parts 21 and 22. I'm only going to show you one side being done because it's exactly the same on both sides. And this particular piece will go down a lot easier as it is actually a much simpler surface. Now it does take 2 or 3 more rounds of heat and Meixsell to get it to conform properly, but we do eventually get it down where we want it to go. Now parts 68 and 70 are pretty much exactly like 21 and 22. They are slightly larger and they go on the outside of that diffuser vane instead of on the inside. Now, while your decal is still really wet, you can get away with pulling it up and repositioning it entirely several times. Once it actually starts to dry out and stick in place, then you are stuck with where it's at. You may be able to nudge it around a bit, but you're not completely removing it. So keep it as wet as you can for as long as you can until you really have it where you want it, instead of bumping it around like I just did right there. So once I start busting out the cotton bud, it's pretty much where I want it to go. It's just a matter of getting it to actually lay down. Like I said, I have trouble with the whole rolling thing. What usually ends up happening is I end up rolling the decal out of place instead of rolling the moisture out from under it. So I have this little tapping technique where I just kind of press down on it and it displaces that moisture out. Time for a little more heat. And we can start working it the rest of the way down. Rinse and repeat over and over until it's finished. Here we are, about 30 minutes in on just one half of this diffuser. It's been a bit more work than I expected it to be. From here we're moving on to decals 101 and 102. My plan for this one is going to be to line up the bottom corner and then line up the entire bottom edge. Now once we have that in place, we're going to start lining up this side, and then we're going to try to work everything as flat as we can with the brush. Once we have it pretty much where we want it, we'll hit it with the Meixsell and again with the heat. Just over and over, we'll repeat this process until we get it all the way conformed down. Alright guys, we've got one more to go for this side, then we're going to time warp ahead to that top decal. For decals 103 and 104, I use this reflector opening as my guide to line up the top part of the decal. Once I had that down, I then worked on lining up the rest of it along one of the edges, and this one actually went down pretty well. I'm not going to make you sit through this again. You've been watching me do decals for like the last 15 minutes. Most people have probably already clicked off of this and gone on to watch something else. I just kind of wanted to show you the strategy that I took to get these into place. They are by far not perfect. There are bumps, there are wrinkles, there's pinholes. I've had to poke holes just to get air bubbles out, but they're down. We are back, and side 2 seems to have gone better than side 1 did. Part of that was due to the fact that I wasn't recording, so I could stick my big old head right in the face of the part where the camera would have been. I also think part of it is just the fact that I have a slightly better feel for this carbon and getting it down, so I could move through it a little bit easier. It's still not great. Now part 58 should go right along the top. My original plan was to line up the center section of the decal and the rest should be in place, which is sort of right. You do need to get the center section lined up side to side to make sure that the decal is even across the part. But if you try to line up the center section along the very edge, the rest of the decal is too far forward and there's a gap between that back edge and the edge of the decal. Once you get the center section lined up side to side, you need to slide it back so that the sides line up right along that top edge, and then you can work the center down. Now, it may take a bit of coercion. You may have to nudge them and lift them and reposition them a few times, but it is important that the sides line up right up to that very edge. As that edge is visible, it sticks out a little bit past the end of the car, so you will see it if there is a gap here. And at the end, it should look something kind of like this. Hopefully yours looks a little better than mine does. We'll do a quick test fit with the body, and you can see what I mean on how it sticks out a bit, so you really can see that top decal. The rest of the exterior carbon is pretty straightforward. It's all one, maybe two pieces, and they go down pretty well. So we're going to jump ahead and move on to some other decals on this car, because there are more. Now, the first one we're going to start with is this rectangular Ferrari hood ornament. We'll just nudge that into place, dry it off, and it should be good. Easy peasy. Next up, we have the Scuderia shields. Now, Alpha Models gives you a piece of photo etch to go under these to give them more of a 3D appearance. However, from what I can find, most, if not all of these cars have these shields hand painted directly on the body, and they sit under the clear coat. So I'm personally not going to use the photo etch. I'm going to apply these decals directly to the body. In order to line the decal up on the other side, we're going to put a small piece of tape straight across the body, as straight as you can get it. Do not let the tape touch the original decal, just make sure that it does line up in the center. We can then use that as a center line to line up the decal on the other side. Next, we have the fairing badges, which say Ferrari Monza SP2 on them. I wish they had given me a full fairing cover in green like they did with the blue and the yellow and the red, but they just gave me the letters. These almost didn't make it on the body. The number 2 on the driver's side decal folded over while taking it off the backing plate, and the whole decal folded several times while trying to get it on the body. I spent 20 minutes with this decal, just trying to get it flat and not folded over. We kept it wet, we did manage to get it down, but most of the footage is either out of frame or covered by my head. The passenger side decal, though, went down with no drama at all. Now, for the most part on lighter bodies, I find that the black Tamiya panel liner is just too harsh of a contrast, so we're going to go with this dark gray. In hindsight, we probably could have gotten away with the light gray, as it's still a really harsh contrast against this white body. We're just going to go all around the body, hitting all the panel lines with the panel liners every so often, making sure that they fill completely in. Now, I have mentioned it before, this very large, wide panel line looking thing that goes around the cockpit and towards the back of the body and ties in with the taillights is not actually a panel line. It is a piece of gloss black trim. So we are going to use the black panel liner on here. My original plan was just to come back in with a paintbrush and brush paint this, but I thought about it, and that could cause some serious issues with the interactions between the paints before the clear. It does need to be a gloss black, so I'm just going to go ahead and apply the panel liner. Now, the Tamiya panel line accent colors are an enamel based paint. They are thinned with something as similar to an odorless mineral spirits. As long as it is not thinned with a lacquer based thinner, you can apply the panel liner on top of a lacquer paint and then come back with odorless mineral spirits and clean it up later without damaging your paint. If you find that your panel liner has dried up in the bottle a bit, and you need to thin it out, maybe it's gotten too thick, always make sure you use odorless mineral spirits and not lacquer thinner to thin it back down. We've given the panel liner some time to dry up. Now we're coming back with some cotton buds and some odorless mineral spirits. Now one end of the cotton bud is wet, the other end is dry. We're just going to go all over the body and we're going to lift up the panel liner that is on the body panels while not pulling up the panel liner that is down into the panels. Once you think you've got all the panel liner off the body, set it aside and come back to it in about an hour and look the body over again with some fresh eyes. A lot of times you'll find that you've missed some panel liner somewhere. We are back in the booth. We have Splash 2K Clear. This is a 3-to-1 mix, so we've got 6 mils of clear to 2 mils of activator. I have also added 1 mil of Mr. Leveling Thinner. I have spoken to Sam at Splash and he's confirmed that you can thin this with Mr. Leveling Thinner if you want a thinner clear. I've also reconfigured the Infinity airbrush with the 0.44 millimeter needle and nozzle setup, as I think it may give me a smoother finish on the clear coat. Now, as usual, we're going to go around all of our bottom edges, make sure we get everything covered before we put down our first coat of clear, and that first coat is going to be pretty much a medium coat. In this configuration with the 0.4 millimeter needle, the brush just was not going to do a mist coat. I typically don't do a mist coat anyhow. I do pretty much a medium coat on my first coat of clear, and then I follow it up with 1 or 2 heavier coats after that. But there just was not going to be a mist coat in this brush setup. The remaining body panels in white, as well as all the carbon fiber, also got some clear. We are back for coat number 2. Now that first coat did lay down really nice. However, just painting the body, the 3 additional body color small parts, and the, I think 4, maybe 5 exterior carbon fiber parts, we shot all 9 mil of clear in that first coat. That is way too much clear. I really wish that Harder and Steenbeck had included a 0.35 millimeter needle like a lot of other brushes do. I feel that would have been the perfect size for a 2K clear coat like this, and it would have shot with no issues at all. For me, that's not that big of an issue. I have other airbrushes, and I never bought this airbrush with the intent of using it for clear coats. I just want to use it on absolutely everything for this build to get a feel for what this brush would be like long term as a daily driver for someone who only had one brush. In that situation, my advice would be either A, pick up a cheap brush with a 0.35 millimeter needle just to shoot your clear coat with. B, use the 0.44 millimeter needle setup, but use that limiter at the back to limit how far you can pull back and control how much clear you put down. That may help you a little bit. I was not running the limiter here. The other option is to overly thin your clear coat and learn to shoot an overly thin clear and learn how to compensate with the issues that come with that. One of those being that a overly thin clear is more likely to run on you. But running with the 0.25 setup at full strength on this clear, I definitely feel like there is more sanding work that's going to have to go on than there really should have been, because the 0.25 millimeter needle setup did struggle a little bit with the clear coat. Here we are back for coat number 3, and I apologize, I am pretty much out of frame for this entire coat. I am trying to work out a good camera angle to be able to get a good view of what I'm doing, while at the same time being able to see what I'm doing while I'm recording. This, unfortunately, is not that camera angle. I probably could have gotten away with only shooting 2 coats of clear. I shot a 3rd coat for 2 reasons. The first reason, I had a bunch of clear left over. After shooting the full 9 mil batch of clear in that first coat, I mixed up another batch, and again it was another 9 mil batch of clear, 6 mil of clear coat, 2 mil of activator, and another mil of thinner. However, that batch lasted the entire 2nd and 3rd coats. I may have had a tiny bit left over, but I don't think I did. The second reason for shooting a third coat of clear is because I know I've got a lot of sanding to do. Like I said, in that second coat, there was a lot of struggling with the airbrush. It did spit in some places. There's a significant amount of dust in here. I know that I'm going to have to do a lot of work to get this cleaned up, and having another coat of clear on here is going to give me a little bit more room to sand down before I burn through and start damaging the paint. We are back from the booth. It has been a couple of hours. This is now what I would call dust dry, meaning that any dust that settles on this is not going to embed into the clear coat. It would just brush right off. I would not touch this for at least 24 hours. You can still imprint into the clear with your fingers and mar the finish. I also would not start sanding and polishing for at least 2 to 3 days on any 2K clear coat. For me, I usually wait forever. It's usually the last thing I do before I put the body and the chassis together because I just really don't like sanding. I like painting. Now there's a lot, and I mean a lot of dust in this body. You can definitely see it on parts of the green. It's harder to see on the white. You have to angle it to get the light to catch it, and that's going to make this harder to sand and polish out. Some things, like the large section on the sides here, are from the airbrush spitting when I change down to the 0.25 needle, and those will be a lot more work than the dust will be. But all in all, it is fairly minor stuff. We don't have any runs or anything like that, so it is all doable. As long as I don't sand through the clear coat and damage the paint, it'll all be good. Honestly, that will be the challenge, because trying to sand clear over white paint is very hard, as it's hard to see what you're doing. It all just ends up looking like white, but the color is fantastic. I love how the color turned out. It definitely has the pearl finish, but there's still that slight creaminess from the Bianco Avis, and the green looks fantastic when the light hits it. So that is going to be a wrap for this one. Thanks for hanging out with me and building with me. I always appreciate you guys watching the videos. I'm not certain exactly what my next steps are going to be. We will probably move to the interior because there is a lot to do in the interior, and I want to take a break from the body. For the most part, all this kit really is a body and an interior. The interior may take me 2 or 3 parts to do. Again, there is a lot to it. There's a ton of carbon. Almost the whole interior is covered in carbon, and there are some fairly large and complicated pieces. There is also a lot of decals, and there's a lot of very small photo etch as well. So I'm going to start getting to work on that, and I will catch you guys on the next one.